Understand when a friend was feeling sad, or maybe you just didn't catch on that a coworker was angry, or even on a personal level, maybe your child is being bullied at school, but he's not telling you, and you're not picking up on the signals. Who would want to live in that kind of world? We all have different personalities, we have different wants and different needs, and we have different ways of showing our emotions. Navigating through it all takes tact and cleverness, especially if we want to be successful in life. So this is where emotional intelligence becomes important. So what are our learning objectives for today? All right, let me call them up. All right. Actually, I listed 5 things we want to do this morning or this afternoon now. Number 1, understand the concept of emotional intelligence. Examine its role in our lives is the second place we want to go. Take a look at its value take a look at its value and then value its impact in the workplace. Recognize that leading from the heart is ultimately a strategy for success, and learn how to improve our emotional intelligence. So what is emotional intelligence? It starts out with the recognition that our emotions play a much greater role in thought, in decision making, and in individual success, I think, than we commonly acknowledge. Remember, emotional intelligence is not measured. It's also a set of skills. It's control of your emotions. It's self-motivation. It's empathy. And it's social competence in interpersonal relationships. Really, at the end of the day, I call it's about emotional mastery. Recognizing your emotions and being in control of them. Now, having a little trouble advancing the slides here for some reason. All right. In marriage, emotional intelligence means listening well and being able to calm down. In the workplace, it manifests itself when bosses give subordinates constructive feedback regarding their performance. In a whole new realm that I've become aware of in putting this together, emotional intelligence characterizes a lot of programs in schools across the country, where kids are taught conflict resolution and impulse control and social skills. So emotional intelligence it's an awareness of your actions and your feelings and how they affect those around you. It also means that you value others. You listen to their wants and their needs. And you are able to empathize or identify with them on many different levels. You know, there was a time, there was a time when IQ was considered the leading determinant of success. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But today there is an absolute ton of research that says not so fast. And there's also a sidebar issue that says that IQ is only part of who we are. And some scholars like to look at EI or EQ as that part of our being that is sometimes under the surface, as our graphic shows. To that I say, hey, there's always the lesson of the Titanic. We all learn that there are things below the surface that can wreck you, can wreck your life, can wreck your career, or even kill you. And even marketers have grabbed onto this whole emotional intelligence business. Engaging a customer and encouraging him or her to buy a car requires appealing to both sides of the customer's personality, and then finding the right mix, and then arriving at some middle where the purchase becomes reality. One of the things I've found in preparing for our webinar today is that people with high IQ are usually very successful in all that, with high emotional intelligence, are usually successful in most things they do. Why is that? Well, it's because they're the ones that other people want on the team. When people with high emotional intelligence send an email, it gets answered. When people with emotional intelligence need help, they get it. Because they make others feel good, they tend to go through life much more easily than people who are easily angered or upset. This whole subject has really been around for a number of years. Here we go. It started out really in the 1930s when a guy by the name of Edward Thorndike described the concept of what he called social intelligence as the ability to get along with others. In the 1940s, David Wessler suggested that affective, that's with an E, affective components of intelligence may just be essential to success in life. In 1950s, our old buddy Abraham Maslow, you know, Maslow always pops up. It doesn't make a difference what you do. And he described how people can build emotional strength. In 1975, Howard Gardner published something called The Shattered Mind, which introduced the concept of multiple intelligence, which suggested that maybe there's more to it than just intellectual. In 1985, a fellow by the name of Wayne Payne introduces the term of emotional intelligence in a doctoral dissertation. Then we get to 87 when Mensa magazine, which obviously is not a magazine that I received, a fellow by the name of Keith Beasley used the term emotional quotient. So it's been suggested that this was really the first time that people began to truly be aware that there was something going on. In 1990, psychologists Peter Salovey and John Mayer published their landmark article, which was called Emotional Intelligence in a Professional Journal. And they said it was a subset of social intelligence that involves the ability to monitor your own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use it to guide your thinking and actions. Then we get to 1995, when everything really hit the map, when Daniel Goleman wrote his book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. What I really didn't know until I was digging around was that Goleman was really intrigued by Salovey and Mayer's article in 1990, and that's what really got him on the track of studying this subject. So the whole point of this is the whole topic of emotional intelligence didn't just fall off the turnip truck. It's been around for quite some time. And because of time, we're not going to dig into all the research studies that have been performed by brain and behavioral psychologists, organizational statisticians, psychologists, and even the military. But trust me, the evidence is there. It's more than anecdotal. It's clinical, and it's easy to look up. Basically, what do we have? Researchers have found that the rational and the emotional sides of our personalities work together to shape intelligence. Let me put it in terms that even yours truly can understand. Think back for a second. How many times have you witnessed, even within yourself, how sometimes your brain can easily succumb to an emotional hijacking, and your emotions completely overpower your own reason? I think that's happened to all of us. Oops, let's go back. One last point, and I guess I didn't know this because I don't have children. It's fascinating to me that so many school systems have gotten on this emotional intelligence bandwagon, because so many experts say that, hey, it's a lack of emotional intelligence that's responsible for many, if not most, of the horrendous acts of violence that have become the stuff of daily newspaper headlines. So in many school systems, there's educational curricula aimed at teaching youngsters how to regulate their emotional responses and to solve conflict peacefully. And there's even a term for it. Some of you may know it. It's called SEL, Social and Emotional Learning. A lot of school districts and even entire states have now set SEL curriculum requirements. In other words, just as kids have to attain a certain level of competence in math and science and language, so now they're figuring out ways to help them master social skills as well. But let's go back to your world and mine. This is the book on the left, published in '95, and Time magazine immediately picked up on it and helped put the book on the bestseller list. And suddenly this whole business enters our individual and our corporate streams of consciousness, if you will. And you can call it EI or EQ. It really doesn't matter. It's the same thing. Tend to find that most of the experts call it EI for emotional intelligence and tend to use EQ when we feel the need to be cute and compare EQ, IQ, whatever. So what? What does it mean? Well, for starters, Harvard Business School, the Harvard Business Review, hailed it as a groundbreaking, paradigm-shattering idea and one of the most influential business ideas of the decade. I think it's a good idea to remember that, claims like this in the business world too often prove to be fads with no real underlying substance. But today you have everybody from the government's Office of Personnel Management to American Express to companies like Johnson & Johnson, all of which routinely look through a lens, and that lens is emotional intelligence in hiring, promoting, and developing employees. You can go to Amazon.com and find all kinds of books on this subject. Go to Google. Article after article is there, pardon me, where people are researching emotional intelligence. Johnson & Johnson is a great example, by the way. They've done as much research on this subject as anyone, and their results are pretty well known. For instance, they found in their divisions around the world, those people identified at mid-career as having high leadership potential also happen to be far stronger in emotional intelligence competencies than were their less promising peers. Rutgers, and you'll kind of see this in the middle of the screen here, Rutgers University has CREO, which is the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organization. As seen here, you can even find them on Facebook. And yes, there are a variety of models and inventories and increasingly all kinds of instruments where you can measure what are called socio-emotional competencies. So yes, you can assess those strengths and weaknesses. But let's get back to basics. We do that by saying, okay, Steve, so what's the buzz all about? Pretty much the buzz is about emotional intelligence is probably one of the missing pieces of the workplace performance puzzle. I mean, think about it for a second. Why is it that some people with high IQs are really high performers in the workplace? And yet we all know others who obviously have a very high IQ, smart people, but they're not successful, sometimes not at all. So is there something else? Is there really another intelligence? So here we go. This is what Goleman defined as the 5 domains of emotional intelligence. First is empathy, the ability to recognize and understand other people's emotions. Social skills, the ability to manage relationships, as in managing the emotions of others. Self-awareness, the ability to know your emotions. Self-regulation, the ability to manage your emotions. And then motivation, the ability to motivate yourself. The slide says it's the ability to sense, understand, and apply the power and acumen of emotions. Why? Why does this matter? Why does it matter in the workplace? Because of the last part. In order to facilitate high levels of collaboration and productivity from all these people in yellow, all of whom you can probably put a name to that face. There's been a lot of research on this. I'll share a couple studies. One, research on IQ as a predictor of what's going to happen to people. Something called the Somerville study. This was a 40-year longitudinal investigation of 450 boys who grew up in Somerville, Massachusetts. 2/3 of them were from welfare families, and 1/3 had IQ below 90. However, IQ had little relation to how well they did at work or for the rest of their lives, for that matter. Researchers found that the thing that made the biggest difference were childhood abilities, such as being able to handle frustration, control emotions, and get along with other people. Another study of 80 PhDs in science in the 1950s. These people underwent a battery of personality tests, IQ tests, and interviews when they were all graduate students at Berkeley in the 50s. 40 years later, when these people were in their 70s, they were tracked down, made of their success based on resumes, evaluations by others, and other professional sources. And once again, it turned out that social and emotional abilities were, get this, 4 times more important than IQ in determining professional success and prestige. So, don't believe me? Check this. Research says you are between 40 and 122% more effective, especially in roles that require influencing and guiding others' choices, if you have emotional intelligence. Some other studies, Air Force. I found an Air Force study where they used EI to select recruiters, and when they did so, they increased their ability to predict successful recruiters by nearly 3-fold. A multinational consulting firm assessed people on EI competencies. They found that their partners who scored above the median on 9 or more of them delivered $1.2 million more profit than others. And I'm like, so what? So I kept digging and saying, that was 139% incremental gain. There's a large beverage firm, which several of you would know, and their standard methods that they use to hire divisional presidents found that 50% of them left within 2 years. Once they engaged emotional intelligence surveys, only 6% left in 2 years. And 2 more, there's a manufacturing plant where after EI training, lost time accidents were reduced by 50% and formal grievances reduced from an average of 15 a year to 3 per year. And then our good friends at a collection agency, when they employed emotional intelligence as they were recruiting people, their goal attainment went from 80% to 163%. There are many, many more examples of that, but those are just some of the ones that prove there's something to this. Research by the Center for Creative Leadership down in North Carolina has found that the primary cause of derailment in executives involve deficits in emotional competence in 3 areas especially: difficulty in handling change, not being able to work well in a team, and poor interpersonal relations. So at this point, I'm going to ask Sue if she would unmute everybody. And here are a couple of questions I'd like you to think through for a second. How have you seen others or yourself impacted by somebody's lack of emotional intelligence? And if you don't want to tackle that one, here's the next one. How have you seen the same thing impact a work group or a whole organization for that matter? So does anybody want to step up to the mic and share with us a little bit? Always hard to get the first person to speak up.
Steve, it's Jennifer Jameson at Fort Worth.
Hello, Jennifer in Fort Worth. How are you?
I'm good. I don't have really a question about that, but as a female in an executive environment, how do we kind of straddle that line between our emotional intelligence and then being seen as emotional women when we're trying to make decisions? How do we balance that? That's my dilemma as a female in this environment.
Let's toss that out to the group so that I don't make a career-limiting move here.
That's a really good answer.
Would anybody else like to try answering Jennifer's totally legitimate question while I give it a second of thought? Come on here, bail.
Career eliminate key part there.
And that just goes to compound.
Well, but by the same token, this is Sharon also at Fort Worth as a female. You can use emotion without displaying it. So, I mean, understanding others, and I would guess the emotional intelligence is about understanding how other people see things. Just factor that into your relationships and interactions.
Well, Sharon, that's a good point. And actually, I think we'll answer Jennifer's question a little bit when we go on, so that we don't. I think the key to success here is not to overly focus on the literal translation or definition of emotion, but basically say it's that part of you that understands other people. And Jennifer, I think we'll get to some answers for you in a little bit. Anybody else want to chime in here? Going once? Right. Yeah.
I have a comment for Jennifer. I'm a pretty open person, and I noticed one time when I was growing up, I came into a room that everyone was in wheelchairs. I've never thought I had any discernment for whether someone's in a wheelchair or not, but I realized I did not know that they were in wheelchairs because there were no formal chairs in the room. They brought their chairs with them. And it wasn't until they came away from the table, like, wow, they're in wheelchairs. And I realized I did see them differently. I didn't think I did, but I did. And what I took from that, no matter what, we all are not necessarily in a bad way. I mean, we discriminate hot from cold. What I found for myself is rather than concerning myself so much with the emotional stuff, I can state where things are now, like the keyboard's on. I really need it on the right. Can you move it to the right? So I state what's here first. And if I
You're fading. We can't hear you.
The emotional part out. I can't totally control what other people do, but it's me. Does that make any sense, Jennifer?
Well, I think it made good sense. Thank you. I got time for one more comment or one more answer to one of these questions or to Jennifer's.
Hi, this is Melinda. I was just going to say, I think an answer to her question about how do you separate the two, you really don't so much. If you're using emotional intelligence, then they wouldn't be able to accuse you of using your emotions to make decisions. So if you're self-aware, you all of those other things, combined, and you're actually using your emotional intelligence and have a high EQ, then I think that you can definitively say, my emotions aside, this is the right decision to make, and it's not an emotional decision.
Melinda Hester from Florida, that is a perfect answer. Thank you. All right, let's move on. I'm going to ask Sue to mute people again as we move to the next slide here. So, is a management psychologist who develops and, I think I might have been muted, so let me start over. Yale professor Dr. David Caruso is a management psychologist who develops and conducts EI training around the world. And he's the guy on the left, by the way, not the David Caruso actor from CSI Miami on the right. And no, he's not coming to the conference. This isn't a trick picture on there. But Dr. Caruso says that you can easily interpret that the term emotional intelligence is an oxymoron, because it can appear that each of the words means the opposite of the other. Emotion is often regarded as irrational, while intelligence is supposed to be about rational, logical thinking. So why do we put them together? And he writes, it is very important to understand that emotional intelligence is not the opposite of intelligence. It is not the triumph of heart over head. It is the unique intersection of both. So it's that comment that really sets the stage for the rest of our time here this afternoon. And I know we have some people from the Florida Spaceport Leadership Association on here. And this whole thing came about thanks to them, due to a presentation I made down there during Valentine's Week, no less, when they were chartering and were doing a very community-oriented service project, and we decided that I would speak to Leading from the Heart. So for today's webinar, I thought, well, I'm going to grab some of that because it's the same thing. And this slide says it all. Good leaders understand the connection between the heart and the head. Now, I hope this isn't a point where I can be losing some of you, especially some of you guys. You know, you're sitting out there and you're thinking, all right, Steve, I was hired to do a job, to get a result. As long as I'm getting results and the tasks are being completed, that's all that matters. We have budgets to adhere to, costs to slash, contracts to land. I wasn't hired to be a friend. I was hired to get people to get to a goal. Well, fair enough. You know, I understand you and I can agree with you, and all that's true. But the balance to this approach is to recognize that you are leading people, not simply managing resources or other kinds of assets. So leaders have to be focused on both tasks and people. It's cleaner and a lot easier to be a task leader, I'll grant you. And it's a heck of a lot more complicated sometimes. But the truth is, balance is the operative word. And I will agree with any naysayers, yes, you can lead too far in either direction. You can be too task-focused, you can be too people-focused. But if you're really good, you choose to see, let me rephrase that, or say it again. You choose to see a need for a blended approach, and you choose to integrate the two. So what we're talking about is the leader's heart. Unleashing the most important leadership tool you have, and you'll see in the next slide, this wasn't an original thought. I swiped it. You know, many leaders think the key to effectiveness is their experience. Others believe it's education or training, still others rely on charisma. While these are valuable, they're not the most important. The most significant tool you have is your heart, and knowing what it is and how to use it is the key to leadership effectiveness. And you don't have to take my word for it. There are a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I who have written many books that speak to the subject. These are just a few. And in doing a quick look, they all share a common theme. And that is, our most valuable asset as leaders and managers is not our education, experience, intelligence, or our abilities and talents. They are valuable, but our most important asset is indeed our heart. Now, here's where I think we start to kind of get to Jennifer's question, that our hearts are more than feelings and emotions, which is kind of where we first go when we think about the subject. But our hearts are our deepest places of passion and purpose and conviction and identity. If I were talking to you about, let's say we had a mutual friend and I said, you know, he just has lost heart. Would you simply think that he wasn't emotional anymore? No. I think you'd be smart enough to discern that maybe he had lost passion or somehow adrift, maybe without purpose, that maybe his identity was being compromised or he had lost his zest for life. So let's take it to the workplace. If someone we considered a leader suddenly appeared half-hearted in her work, well, maybe we'd think she wasn't committed or was no longer passionate or had ceased to be engaged and so on. And how many times do we talk about getting to the heart of the matter? Which means what? That we get down to the essence of a situation, we get to the core. So in that vein, our hearts are the core of who we are. And I would say to you, it is not possible for a leader to have a profound impact in someone's life without engaging the heart. I mean, look at our NMA leadership model. You know, we have these 4 circles of leadership competencies. You can read them. There's a green one in the middle. It's in the middle for a reason, and you'll notice that it touches all the other circles. It's called demonstrate personal character. And what that means is you can set direction until the cows come home, and you can spend a lot of time futzing around and building teams and all those kind of things, and you can get people ready for change. But at the end of the day, if that's all you have, you're going to be lost, because none of that matters if you can't demonstrate personal character, if people don't trust you, if you don't model integrity. So we have to choose to make the right kinds of decisions about how we lead. As I was assembling my thoughts for the webinar, I do what I always do, and that's call up my good buddies at Google. And I was actually just looking for some of the graphics that I'm using. But what I discovered is, geez, there's all kinds of books and there's blogs, there's everything imaginable out there on this subject. So what I'm going to do here is something that I need to apologize, because I usually avoid this like the plague. And that is to use an acronym as a springboard for my thoughts. I've watched other people do that, and I think it's kind of a cop-out, if not a little bit cheesy sometimes. And I remember last year, one of our speech contestants got up, and God love her, she started going along, leadership, L is for listening, and I'm like, I about threw up. So, but guess what? I'm about to pay a price, because what goes around comes around, and I'm going to do it. The reason really is because when I was nibbling around on the website, I found some of these blogs that I mentioned where a couple consultants actually did this. And, I opened them with kind of one eye closed and realized they were all onto something. And so I'm going to steal shamelessly because I liked what they said. So let's go with H. One of the sources said H stands for, when you look at emotional intelligence and leading from the heart, H is for human. And someone else said it's for humility. Well, you and I are human. And if we want to lead others more effectively, they have to see us as such. You and I make mistakes. We have weaknesses. When you let other people see that, and when you see it in yourself, people will see you as more real. And you know what? If you think they don't see your weaknesses because you don't mention them, I have news for you. You are totally fine. When the team can see more of the real you, they're more likely to choose to follow you. Humility. Many experts say this is by far the most important characteristic of a leader. Really, it's the power to learn from others, to be coachable, to know that there's more you don't know than you do know. And it's recognizing, maybe a shock to some of you, so hold on to your seatbelts. It's recognizing that you are probably not always the smartest person in the room. And I love this thing by C.S. Lewis. I actually found it elsewhere. Then when I was nibbling around for graphics, I actually found this. I went, oh, cool. Humility is not thinking less of ourselves. It is thinking of ourselves less. And boy, do I know some people to whom I'd like to tweet that. All right, E. Well, guess what? Both my sources used the same word for the letter, which I thought was interesting. So I happen to agree with it, by the way. I think it's probably the most important attribute that any of us can offer to anyone. Family, friends, co-workers. There is such power that comes from having empathy. Now, there are probably those who confuse sympathy with empathy. Sympathy is actually what? It's a feeling of caring and understanding for the suffering of others. We all want to have it. Empathy is understanding what others are feeling because you have experienced it, or you can put yourself in their shoes. That's why it's more powerful. The best leaders put themselves in the shoes of others by thinking of similar situations or sharing your own related experiences. Hello, we are much more likely to follow someone when we can identify with them in some way. And one of the ways you do that with people is through true empathy. I call it being other-centered instead of self-centered. It's being aware of and attuned to the needs of other people and choosing to be compassionate. Now, like the rest of you, things find their way to my email box. These were just a couple that came in early in the year. I'd used them in Florida, so I brought them back up. Those of you in the safety industry probably know David Sarkis. All of a sudden, he shows up with "Do Your Leaders Have Empathy?" And on a Harvard Business Review blog one day, they had this great little article called 3 Ways Leaders Can Listen with More Empathy. So my point is, there's so much work being done on this subject. Even Henry Ford, when he was living, said if there's any great secret of success in life, it lies in the ability to put yourself in another person's place and to see things from his or her point of view as well as from your own. All right, sticking with empathy for a second. What is empathetic listening? Well, there are 3 components. Number 1 is our ability as leaders to recognize verbal and nonverbal clues and cues that people give off. Standard stuff, tone, facial expression, body language. You know, as a leader, you have to receive information by all your senses. You have to develop that awareness. What's really going on here? It's oftentimes recognizing what others are not saying can tell you what they are. Second is processing. You understand the meaning of the messages and keep tracks of points of the conversation. So in other words, you let people know that you are remembering what they say. And you do that by summarizing and capturing themes and key messages. You know, you can say after a discussion, hey, here are a couple of key points I heard. I think we disagree here and we agree there. Here's some suggested next steps. What do you think? And then lastly, that's not very far removed from responding. You want to assure others that listening has occurred, that you heard it. And then you want this communication to continue. It's that verbal acknowledgement. It's fully engaging in a conversation. It's nodding your head. It's like saying, that's a great point. Making people feel that what they say matters. And then lastly, to me, there's the fourth one, follow up. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If there are changes to be made after listening to someone, make them. If you made a promise, see it through. There's nothing worse than someone opening up to you, and you give every signal in the world that they were heard, and then nothing happens. In short, the leader can find many ways to demonstrate that you have heard them. It is ultimately the ability and willingness to listen with empathy is what sets a leader apart. So, group discussion time. I'm going to ask Stu to go ahead and unmute you, and we'll see what's on your mind. I put 2 questions up here. How have you seen others respond positively to your own awareness of their mindset? In other words, have you ever really made a conscious effort to go, okay, I need to get out of my normal self and be a little more empathetic? And have you ever seen a problem solved or a team turn around because the right person got involved? So let's toss this out and see who's there. All right, anybody? Anybody seen a time when emotional intelligence has saved the day, either for you or someone else? All right. I guess we don't have any comments. So we will go back to our script. All right. Sue, thank you. I'll let you mute everybody again. Wait a minute. All right. So let's move on to the next slide. And that's where we get to the letter A. A stands for, according to my sources, 2 things, attitude and authenticity. I read once that attitude isn't about logic, it's about emotion. Attitude is contagious, like a virus, but in a good way. And guess what? If you're the leader of a team, you need to be contagious, and you need to be infected all the time, because people respond to you and how you present yourself. I mean, think about it. How many times have you checked to see if the boss is in a good mood before you throw an idea on the table, or before you ask for Friday off? Now, you know, let's get real. Is it okay to sometimes be disappointed or frustrated and say so? Absolutely. Doing it in small doses can be powerful, especially if you're usually upbeat and positive, but it needs to be in contrast to your normal positive person. And you know, 100 years ago, many of us read everything we could get our hands on by Peter Drucker, who wrote The Effective Executive. And what was central to many of his books? One simple thing, that the leader sets the pace for a team, an organization, your work group. And you set culture by the attitude that you convey. A stands for authenticity. No masks, no pretending. Bring the real work, or the real you, to work every morning. Remember, it's impossible to grow and improve if you're trying to be someone you're not. We all have flaws, and as I said earlier, everybody knows them anyway. I personally think there is great power, and I think we talked about this at one of the leadership development conferences. It's great power when you sometimes have to answer a question with, I don't know. It says you're human. And then what matters is how you follow up. Yeah, okay, I'll find out. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. Are relationships and risks. Relationships, we pretty much covered this one. People want to be led and know by people they like. So if you want to lead more effectively, you got to figure out ways to connect with people. And there's no formula to delivering them. It's just about knowing in your heart that they're important. You all heard me say many times, we had a young gentleman on staff years ago who said, I don't want to go in a break room and sit down. I don't care about people's personal stuff. My answer to that is, I'm not trying to get inside their luggage. I'm just trying to get inside their heads. I need to know who's got things going on that can affect their ability to focus. And then you respect that and you move on. So I'm lucky. I get to come to work every day and work with 3 people whom I enjoy. We've all worked together for a long time, and there's not much that we don't know about each other. R then also stands for risk. It's about vulnerability. Significant human action always involves risk because it involves vulnerability. We don't like it. But you and I have to encourage people to take risk. That is leading from your heart. That is saying, I understand that you want to do this. I'm comfortable with it. I'll help you reframe it. And let's use it as an opportunity to succeed. And then you and I have to step back and let them go for it. I like to call making it a safe environment. That's the leader's role, to cushion the risk by providing support and encouragement and giving people, this is a great phrase, I didn't come up with it, giving people the confidence that they have earned. Then comes the tough part. As a leader, you have to allow people to fail. And as I was going over these notes at home this morning, I'm going, that is so hard for all of us. And I think we're all afraid of that it's part of being emotionally intelligent. Because when there's success, then you can really go celebrate it and champion it. And when there's not, gather your lessons learned and move on. Winston Churchill said, success is the ability to go from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. Well said, Winnie. T stands for trust and tenacity. Trust, simple question. Are you more likely to follow someone you trust or someone you don't? And we could talk about this all day. But chances are, if you're leading from the heart, then you're earning people's trust. And you know, we just finished our Building Virtual Teams course a few months ago. Part of building virtual teams is building trust. And that's a huge piece of whether or not that work group is a team or not. I also say to you that trust is both a noun and a verb. I saw one blogger who said, quote, if you want to build others' trust in you, the noun, learn to trust them more, the verb. I couldn't say it better. I'm not going to talk down to anybody about trust. You know what it is. And we've already talked about a lot of it. But what I will say is in times of uncertainty, and a lot of you are going through that in your industries, the need for trust intensifies. It begins with simply telling the truth, but it intensifies when you're consistent. Actions do speak louder than words. People are always looking to see if you and I walk the talk. And it's not really very far removed from tenacity when it comes to ways of the heart, because they both require courage. You know, I think tenacity isn't about being stubborn. It's actually the reverse. It's being so focused on achievement that you readily accept that you could be wrong. That you can accept, maybe I need to change course. Maybe I need to open my mind to new thinking. And I need to find out what's really going on with my team. You know, let's say you see an underperformer in your group. You get serious about finding out why he or she isn't performing. You don't have to accept subpar performance just because you feel things and you lead from the heart. But leading from the heart should mean, if anything, it should make you more determined to get to the bottom. Find out why it's this perfectly likable and talented individual not living up to his or her potential. And it is because you have heart that you aren't going to give up on this person. And then there are days, when tenacity is also about having thick skin and being resilient. A little more on tenacity. It's also about stopping when barriers appear. You work through challenges and keep going, or are you a victim? It's about grit. No, not the kind we put butter and sugar or butter and cinnamon or whatever people do with grits. It's the other kind. And if you've got it, you accept that the road to success will have roadblocks. So you learn to go over, around, or through them. So leaders, as I wrap up, I ask you to be on the lookout for articles and workshops and other organizations that are reminding us all in the workplace that we are living, breathing human beings. We do not operate in a vacuum, but most of what we do is done by people and by working with and through other people. And then when through our behaviors, we show people that we remember this, that's when we get the results that we want. Why? Because our hearts and our actions begin to foster cooperation and belief and confidence in the mission and in each other. It is the essence of emotional intelligence. Authors Kuznets and Posner tell us without showing others that you care and what you care about, other people won't care what you say or what you know. Leadership is a relationship. It's both personal and interpersonal. We need heart because the struggle to the top is arduous. And when people get to the summit, they need someone shouting in their ear, come on, you can do it. So encouragement boosts performance. We all know that. And it strengthens our resolve. So encouraging from the heart is the leadership practice that connects us with one another. It's social capital joining financial capital and intellectual capital as the three necessary ingredients for organizational success. When you recognize people, they feel valued to the organization and connected to the mission. And I wrote something down here in my notes that I stole from somebody, but I didn't say who, sorry. While we may all be connected, leaders make sure that we're in touch. I think I may have to tweet that out. So what do? I want you to become an emotional intelligence coach. Organize people who have different levels of emotional intelligence and coach them toward goals that will determine how quickly we make those business breakthroughs and how well we're organized. Knowing which buttons to push, knowing when to back off, handling the natural disputes that occur among people, getting people together and motivated and performing. All of these require emotional intelligence. How do we develop it? How do we value it? How do we do it? Few things. Observe how you react to people. Do you rest a judgment before you know all the facts? Do you stereotype? Or do you put yourself in their place and become more open and accepting of their perspectives and needs? Look at your work environment. Do you seek attention for your accomplishments, or do you have that wonderful quality of humility and you give other people a chance to shine? When was the last time you did a self-evaluation? What are your weaknesses? How willing are you to accept that you're not perfect and that you need to work on some areas to make yourself a better person and get in closer touch with people around you? Examine how you react to stressful situations. You blame others, become angry. The ability to stay calm and in control in difficult situations is not only highly valued, it can make or break you. And take responsibility for your actions. If you hurt someone's feelings, apologize directly. Don't ignore what you did or avoid the person. People are usually willing to forgive if you make an honest attempt to make things right. So ultimately, the best leaders do realize they must bring their heart to work. And that last bullet on the previous slide says that we have to examine how our actions will affect others. But we have to do it before we take the actions. If our decisions will impact others, let's put ourselves in their place. How will they feel if you do this? Would you want that experience? If you must take the action, how can you help people deal with its effects? It is your challenge as a leader to figure out how. And to me, this is where our NMA chapters play a huge role, in that you can take a lunch and learn, you can take a chapter meeting, you can have a speaker, you can do a panel. And this is what NMA chapters are all about. How do we find ways to better connect with one another, learn from each other, and be better leaders and managers? So that concludes, did I make it on time? Yeah, even ahead of time. That concludes the formal portion of what I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to ask Sue to unmute the lines, and we will see what people have to say, any comments or questions. So we got 6-7 minutes here to do that. Who would like to chime in? Anyone?
Good afternoon, MMA.
Any thoughts from anybody?
Is there formal training to help people that are maybe a little more challenged with this, or is it just coaching?
Well, I'm sure there is. I would have to, if you'll send me an email, I'll do a little digging and see what I can come up with. Because so many companies are doing it, and they do have training programs. I haven't seen them. A lot of it's proprietary. I'd be glad to do some research.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, then I'm going to thank everybody. I appreciate your indulgence. We appreciate all the people that were on board today. We'll be repeating this at 3 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon. And let me wish everyone a great weekend. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
This
Steve.
was a
Thanks a lot.
great presentation. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Okay,
Steve.
thank you.
Awesome.
Renee, do you have a question? All right, Sue, I'll let you unrecord, and